If you're homeschooling a PDA child, you may have found yourself wondering, how do I introduce all of these beautiful Charlotte Mason ideas without my child feeling like I'm suddenly trying to turn every single thing into school? Because that's the tricky part, right? You discover living books and you fall in love with artist study and you start imagining beautiful poetry tea times and nature walks and beautiful classical music playing throughout your home. And you think this is going to be wonderful. But your PDA child looks at you suspiciously and says, "Why are you doing that?" And suddenly you realize that even beauty and wonder and living ideas can feel like a demand if it's presented in the wrong way. Charlotte talks about giving your child a living feast of ideas, presenting a living feast of ideas to your child. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. That's absolutely correct. That's what we want to do in a Charlotte Mason homeschool. However, what I'm trying to get at today is that maybe the way we're presenting the feast and laying out the feast for our PDA children might need a bit of tweaking. So today I want to talk about bridging the gap between play and learning for PDA learners in a Charlotte Mason homeschool. It's not about disguising learning, dressing it up, or tricking your children into doing schoolwork. And it isn't about finding clever ways to sneak lessons into every moment of their day either. Instead, I want to talk about something that I think can be incredibly valuable for PDA learners. Are you ready? Creating an atmosphere where living ideas, beauty, and learning are simply a part of their life. And then giving our children the freedom to come closer to those ideas when they feel safe enough to do so. That's what I want to talk about today. So grab a cuppa and come join me for the conversation. One of the things I've learned about homeschooling a child with PDA is that sometimes the moment something is clearly labeled as learning, then their nervous system becomes alert and resistant, even if it's something that they would otherwise enjoy. So instead of saying, "Would you like to do artist study?" sometimes we can simply allow beautiful artwork to become a part of their environment. This allows all of that beauty and wonder to be absorbed naturally and casually and organically from their environment without it feeling forced or dressed up as a lesson that they have to participate in. And instead of saying, "Let's listen to this composer for music study," we might simply play the music because we enjoy listening to it. So instead of saying, "Now listen closely because I'm going to read this chapter and then I'd like you to narrate it," we might sit down with a beautiful book and start reading while our child plays nearby. The difference might sound small, but for some children with PDA, it can feel enormous because the first approach says something is expected of you. And the second approach is saying, "This is here, you're welcome to enjoy it with me." And that's where we begin bridging the gap between their world and their play and learning the Charlotte Mason way. So let's start with artist study, okay? So you don't necessarily have to sit your child down at the table, place a painting or a piece of artwork in front of them and say, "Today we are studying Claude Monet." You can simply bring the artwork into your home in a way that feels really natural. So print out a few pieces that you think your child might like and put them somewhere that your child will naturally see them as they go about their day. You could display them on a wall. You could create artwork placemats for the dining table so your child sees the paintings every single time that they sit down to eat and they naturally spark conversation that way. You could leave beautiful coffee table books in the living room for your child to see and potentially pick up when they want to. The artwork becomes a part of your atmosphere. And then organically, you might say something like, "Oh, I saw this painting and I thought it was really lovely, so I just wanted to put it here so I could see it." Or, "I think this one's really pretty because of XYZ. What do you think?" And then you let it go. There's no pressure to give a response or there's no perceived right answer that the child's trying to scavenge for and come up with. There's no expectation that they have to look at it for any certain amount of time. There's no requirement to remember the artist's name. You're simply sharing something beautiful with them. And this is also where knowing your child can be very helpful. For example, I might choose Monet because I know that my child enjoys flowers and water lilies and that more idyllic kind of backyard understanding, hence why we have flowers displayed in our homeschool room. I'm not choosing Monet because the curriculum says that this is who we are studying this term. I'm thinking what might genuinely connect with my child, what might catch their eye, what might make them pause long enough to notice something about the artwork, to pay attention to it, to draw out that curiosity from within them. And they might not say anything. They might walk past it 20 times, and maybe on the 21st time they say, "Why does that painting look blurry?" And suddenly you have an opening. Not because you demanded engagement, but because you gave them the freedom to approach the idea themselves. And the same can be true for classical music. You don't have to announce, "Everybody, it's composer study time, let's go." You can simply play the music in the background as you go about your day, while you're folding washing, while you're making lunch, or during quiet afternoons while your child's occupied with something else, or even while they're playing. And again, I would choose something that you think your child might enjoy. So maybe they like dramatic music with long pauses and dun-dun-dun-duns, or maybe they enjoy fast-paced pieces because they're always on the move and you think that might interest them. Or maybe they're soothed by gentle pianos and that's why you want to choose these specific pieces. Maybe there's a particular composer whose music reminds you of something that your child already loves, and you can casually share your own enjoyment of it with your child. Like, "I really like this piece. It helps me get through my jobs a little bit faster because it's a bit fast paced." Or, "I love listening to this when the house is quiet and I find it really calming." You're not saying, "Now listen carefully because we'll be discussing this later and you're going to need to tell me what you liked about it or what you thought or anything else." You're simply allowing the music to become a part of your family's life. And perhaps eventually your child might start recognizing the piece. And maybe they'll ask, what's this song called? Or maybe they'll ask you to put it on again. Well, maybe they won't. But the goal isn't to manufacture a particular response or to get them to engage with it when you ask them. The goal is to create an atmosphere where beautiful things are available to them, and when they feel comfortable enough, they're able to engage with it in a way that feels organic to them because they're already familiar with the material. Okay, so one really important tip here is don't suddenly change everything, okay? So don't decide on Monday that your home is now going to become a full Charlotte Mason feast and by Tuesday morning you have artwork on every wall, classical music playing constantly, poetry at breakfast, Shakespeare after lunch, and a living book hidden behind every single cushion, right? Because your PDA child is really, really observant. They usually are. They notice changes and they may begin to question, "Why are you suddenly doing all of this?" Or perhaps more importantly, "You're changing things. What do you want from me?" And if it's too many changes at once, something that's meant to feel natural can begin to feel like it's dressed up learning or a disguised demand, and that is not what we want for our PDA child. We want them to engage with the living feast we're providing them organically and naturally, and the desire to do so is all their own. And if our child starts to believe that every beautiful and enjoyable thing that we introduce to them is actually a trick to get them to complete schoolwork or is a demand that you're asking of them, then we can unintentionally damage that sense of safety with what we're providing them in our feast. So go slowly, try one thing at a time. It doesn't matter if it takes a month for one thing. Maybe you start playing one piece of music occasionally, and then that becomes normal. Then a few weeks later, you might put a beautiful painting somewhere in your home. Or, you don't have to transition your entire house or routine overnight. And that usually doesn't go well for either your child or you when we suddenly change everything and expect everything to flow beautifully. That's not setting us up for success. So allow these things to become a genuine part of your family life, because especially for PDA children, authenticity matters. It really, really matters. So if you genuinely love the artwork, then share it. If you really like the music, then play it. And if you find a beautiful poem, read it. Your child is far more likely to sense the difference between, I love this and I really wanted to share it with you, and I'm pretending to casually enjoy this because I really need you to learn something from it, and because the curriculum says that this is what we have to do. And then this brings me to one of my most favorite Charlotte Mason ideas when homeschooling a child with PDA specifically, and that is masterly inactivity. Sometimes our greatest role is not to constantly step in with our child. It's not to always explain, and it's not to quiz, and it's not to check whether they understood, not to immediately turn every spark of interest into a lesson, right? Sometimes we offer something beautiful and then we step back and we watch and we wait and we pray. And we allow our child the room to think and to engage with what we've provided them. Room to wonder and room to approach the idea in their own way. Because when we immediately jump in with, oh, you're interested in Monet. Well, would you like to learn about Impressionism and the art movement of the time and this and that? And we accidentally are closing the door we were hoping to open. And masterly inactivity means learning to resist the urge to grab the moment and turn it into something, and to force our traditional teacher urges into those moments, because that's the only way the child's going to learn, is if we do that. Sometimes we need to just let the moment be. Another way we can bridge the gap between play and learning is through living books. And again, this may look very different from the traditional image that we have of a Charlotte Mason lesson, or what other Charlotte Mason homeschoolers are doing with their living books, with their lessons. You might need to sit on the couch and just casually read a living book out loud while your child's playing on the floor at your feet. They may look like they aren't listening. They may be very engaged in Lego or drawing or playing with dolls, doing something completely unrelated to what's happening with you, and you simply read. This is where I would encourage you to choose a book that you genuinely think that your child would enjoy. So not necessarily the book that you think you should be reading to them or that they should be reading with you. A book that you think might connect with them. Something funny, something adventurous, something full of animals, a mystery, or part of history that they're really interested in. Whatever speaks to your child, there is no pressure. You're not saying, come sit down, it's reading time. You don't require them to narrate. You're not stopping after every single paragraph to make sure they're paying attention. All you're doing is simply reading. Like you might play music in the background while they're playing, you're simply reading in the background while they're playing. You are creating the atmosphere where living ideas are available. They are readily available to your child. You're providing the feast. You are displaying the feast to them. And your child may engage with the feast in a very different way from another Charlotte Mason homeschooler, and that is okay. Actually, I think it's something that we really need to remember, is that the feast is not going to look the same in every single home, and it doesn't have to either. One Charlotte Mason homeschooler might be sitting beautifully at a beautifully prepared table after reading a chapter and then giving an oral narration to the parent, and another might be having a book read to them aloud while they hang upside down on the couch, or building a Minecraft world, or they may be constantly interrupting to ask what happened to a particular character, or having internal thoughts that just pop out. And that's a habit that we can work on, but both children are encountering the living ideas. They are both learning. It just looks very different. And for many PDA children, I think discussion can become the bridge into narration. This is their entry point, right? So perhaps you have casually read a chapter out loud and you have no narration requirement. And when you're finished, you simply make a comment. Oh, I didn't like how he did that. I think that wasn't a very smart idea. And then you move on. You don't look expectantly at your child. You're not waiting for an answer. And you don't say, what do you think? You simply shared a thought about what you've read. Or perhaps you might say, I really liked how she was able to help her family doing that. And again, no expectation, but over time your child may begin to respond as they become comfortable with it. Yeah, I think she should have ... right? And suddenly you're having a discussion. You're having a conversation about what you've read. And this is where narration can begin. Not always with, tell me everything you remember about the chapter, but through conversation, through opinions, through disagreement even, through, well, that was silly. Or I think this one's my favorite character. Those thoughts matter and those responses matter. And they are signs that your child is engaging with the ideas. And as your child becomes more comfortable with you casually reading aloud, you may begin testing the waters a little bit. Perhaps after you've already made a comment about the chapter, you might think, or you might ask, what did you think about this part? Notice that you're not asking them to narrate the whole chapter. What you're doing is you're giving them a little anchor or a doorway into the discussion. It's just one point that you're asking their opinion on. For some children, that specific entry point may feel safer than, okay, tell me everything you remember. And for other children, that entry point might feel too direct or too controlled and structured. So perhaps a more open-ended question about the chapter would work better. So the important thing is to know your child and know what approach and what questions will work best for your child. And to be honest, a lot of the time we do this through trial and error as parents. There's no single narration method that will work for every child, and that especially applies when we're talking about PDA learners. Okay, let's talk about poetry tea time. This is another area where I think our intentions really matter. So poetry tea time can be absolutely beautiful and special and fun and exciting, but we don't want to create this elaborate experience only for our child to eventually realize, oh, this is actually a school lesson. We don't want it to feel like it's a trick, right? So instead, we have to think of it as a genuine invitation. So maybe you say, I thought it might be fun to try some special snacks and read some poetry together this afternoon. Would you like to join me? And then you genuinely allow them to have ownership. So maybe your child doesn't like the idea of fancy teacups or even tea in general. And that's okay. Maybe they would rather sandwiches and popcorn and lemonade. And that's fine, so go for it. Maybe they want to sit on a picnic blanket. Maybe they want to choose their own snacks. And maybe they want to read aloud silly poetry rather than beautiful, gentle poetry that you had planned. And that's really awesome, the fact that they want to engage with it. So let them shape the experience. Allow them part of that ownership. And because the goal isn't to recreate someone else's perfect poetry tea time, the goal is connection, right? It's enjoyment and an opportunity to share beautiful language together with no pressure, no hidden test, no requirement that they sit still and listen perfectly for 45 minutes. It's just an invitation. And finally, let's talk about nature study, because this one can be tricky sometimes. Sometimes we make nature study feel much more complicated than it really needs to be. We think we need to research before we go on the nature walk. We need a list of things to find, we need field guides, we need a notebook, we need to know the Latin names of plants and animals. But you know what? Sometimes, especially when you're trying to bridge that gap between play and learning, you can just simply go for the walk together and point out the nature friends that you already know. You don't need to study ahead. You don't need to rely on your phone and pull it out to make sure that you've got the right name. As you're walking along, you might simply say, oh, the wattle is so pretty and golden today. I think it's blooming a little bit early. Or you might say, oh, before we go, it's getting close to swooping season, so we might need to keep an eye out for the magpies. That's it. You're sharing the world around you. You're noticing things. And perhaps your child will respond or point something out on their own. And perhaps they might even point something out that you didn't see. Or perhaps they'll ask you a question that, oh my goodness, you don't know the answer to. And you know what? You can say, I don't know, because you don't have to know everything. Nature study doesn't have to be a lesson that you have to prepare, in advance, in depth in advance even. Sometimes it's simply learning to notice things. When your child feels safe enough, they might begin to notice things aloud to you. Maybe one day they say, that tree didn't have flowers last time. And there it is. It's an observation. It's a connection. It's a sharing of their observation with you. A relationship with the natural world. And guess what? You didn't need to demand it. You didn't need to structure it. And you didn't need to force it. I think this is the heart of what I want to say today. When we make these adjustments for our PDA learners, we're not necessarily removing the Charlotte Mason feast from them, right? We're still offering the living books. We are still offering the beautiful artwork and the music and the poetry and the natural world around them and the living ideas. But sometimes all we're changing is how we're presenting the feast, right? So for some children, the feast is placed directly in front of them and they're invited to sit down and enjoy it. Great. For our PDA children, sometimes the feast is placed around the room. The music is playing softly, the artwork is on the wall, the poetry book is sitting on the table, the living book is being read aloud while they play, nature is being noticed as you walk around together, and slowly, organically, your child begins to realize these things are here. I'm allowed to enjoy them. Nobody is making me perform my interest. Nobody is going to suddenly turn my curiosity and interest in something into a demand. And perhaps over time, they move closer. They ask questions. They join the conversation that's happening in the room already. They request another chapter. They point out the wattle before you do. They tell you which painting they like best. They start singing along to a piece of music. And those moments are beautiful because they belong to your child. They belong to them. So if you're trying to bridge the gap between play and learning with your PDA child, my biggest encouragement would be to slow down, right? Don't feel like you need to make every single thing educational. Don't feel like every beautiful moment needs to become a lesson. You just need to offer, to share, to notice, enjoy, and step back. Practice a little bit of masterly inactivity. Trust that the living ideas can still reach your child, even when learning doesn't look like a traditional Charlotte Mason lesson. You are still creating the atmosphere. You are still providing the feast. And it may just look different. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, you're not trying to recreate someone else's homeschool in your home. You're trying to know your child. You are trying to teach your child. And sometimes the bridge between play and learning isn't built by making play more educational. Sometimes it's built by making learning feel safe enough to become a part of their life. And as Charlotte Mason said, education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. And that, for many of our PDA children, can be where the most beautiful learning begins. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope it was encouraging. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.